The signing nurse is proof that diversity hiring compromises patient safety. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 17 minutes before his entire world collapsed. He stood at the vending machine on the third floor of Cedar Creek Medical, speaking low enough that only the two board members beside him could hear, his voice carrying the particular contempt of a man who had never questioned whether contempt was justified. Ashley Cooper was exactly 47 feet away, retrieving her energy bar from the slot below, and she heard every word with the clarity that comes from a decade of training to listen while appearing not to listen. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song above her head. The vending machine's motor whirred as it dispensed her selection. These sounds became her world for the 3 seconds she needed to absorb what he had said without letting her face acknowledge it. She did not tremble. She did not burn red. She did not retreat to a supply closet to process the insult in the privacy of tears. Her jaw clenched once, barely perceptible, and her hands remained perfectly steady as she reached into the slot and withdrew the aluminum foil wrapper. Her movements were economical, deliberate, stripped of anything that might reveal the calculation happening behind her eyes. The other nurses had learned long ago not to watch her during these moments. They knew better than to offer sympathy or validation. Sympathy was a luxury she could not afford. Dr. Whitfield continued speaking, his voice dropping even lower now that he believed she was out of earshot. Before month's end, security will escort her out. We cannot have someone like that making critical decisions about patient care. It sets a precedent. He turned to face the board members directly, and his smile carried the confidence of a man who had never encountered consequence for anything he had said. We maintain standards at Cedar Creek. Always have. We're not some diversity initiative hospital. Ashley did not look back at him. She opened her energy bar and took a deliberate bite, chewing slowly, methodically, as if this was the most important thing happening in the hospital at that moment. The wrapper crinkled in her hands. Her movements could have been filmed for a masterclass in operational composure. Pain was information. Insult was just another form of data. She catalogued Dr. Whitfield's words the way she catalogued everything, filed them away, noted them, and continued with her mission. Her shift was 8 hours from now. Her patient needed her. Everything else was noise. She returned to the ICU without acknowledgement of what she had heard, passing the medication cart, nodding once to Marcus Williams, the charge nurse who had been studying her with careful respect for the past 6 months. Marcus never asked questions about why she never mentioned her past, why her documentation was written in a style that seemed somehow militaristic in its precision, why she moved through emergency situations with a calmness that bordered on otherworldly. Some people simply understood that certain silences were sacred. Marcus was one of them. Room 347 waited for her. Master Sergeant Marcus Chen lay in the hospital bed with the still presence of a man whose body had learned to conserve energy as a survival mechanism. His chart indicated he was 43 years old, decorated, deaf from an IED blast sustained 7 years prior during his 3rd deployment with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company. The pneumonia that had brought him to Cedar Creek Medical was resolving, but something else was happening underneath the clinical narrative. Something that only someone trained to see what others missed could detect. Ashley pulled his medical file from the holder at the foot of his bed and reviewed the progression with the focused attention of a trained diagnostician. The initial admission notes recorded standard community-acquired pneumonia. The first 72 hours showed appropriate response to antibiotics, azithromycin and cefotaxime, both of which were correct for his condition. But the lab values told a different story. Potassium elevated at 5.8 millimoles per liter on day 2. Elevated again at 6.1 on day 3. His creatinine climbing in ways that did not match the clinical picture of simple pneumonia. The medications listed in his chart were appropriate, but something was being introduced into his full line that had no business being there. She reviewed the nursing notes from the other shifts. Every third notation came from Jennifer Price, one of Dr. Whitfield's mentees, a nurse who had been seen leaving his office 17 minutes before the first lab abnormality appeared. Jennifer Price, who had signed the 4-line documentation at 2:44 a.m. on the night his potassium first spiked. Jennifer Price, who had access to every medication cabinet on the unit and the digital codes to unlock the controlled substances locker. Ashley's hands remained steady as she wrote her own assessment in Marcus Chen's chart. She documented his current vital signs with the precision of military medical training: blood pressure 138/82, heart rate 76 and regular, respiratory rate 14, oxygen saturation 97% on 2 liters nasal cannula, temperature 37.2 Celsius. Everything she wrote could be defended in court. Everything she wrote was true. She did not write what she suspected. She did not document her hypothesis that the man in this bed was being slowly poisoned by someone on this unit, that his decline was not accidental, that his death would be recorded as a natural outcome of his underlying illness. Instead, she approached his bedside and began signing to him in American Sign Language, her hands moving with the same precision as her handwriting. The movements came from muscle memory that predated her current cover by 18 years. "How are you feeling today, Master Sergeant?" Her hand shaped the words with practiced fluency. "Any chest pain? Any difficulty breathing?" Marcus Chen's eyes tracked her movements, and he signed back slowly, his hands a bit stiff from disuse, from the months of recovery following his initial blast injury. "Better. Tired. Why is that new doctor watching me?" His hands paused. "The one who comes in when the woman with the needle is here." There it was. The confirmation she had been waiting for. Not direct evidence, but testimony from a man whose hearing loss had forced him to develop extraordinary observational skills. Deaf soldiers learned to see what others missed because they could not hear it. Marcus Chen had seen Jennifer Price and Dr. Whitfield together. Probably more than once. Probably at precise moments that corresponded to his deterioration. Ashley continued signing, her face revealing nothing of the calculation happening behind her eyes. "We're monitoring your progress, Master Sergeant. Your care is our priority." Her hand shaped the words with deliberate reassurance. "Trust me." She meant it in ways he could not possibly understand. She meant it with the weight of her true identity, with the authority of her actual rank: a Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, weapons specialist, field medic, combat veteran of 23 years and 4 separate tours through theaters of war that she would never discuss. She meant it with the voice of a woman who had held Marcus Chen's commanding officer's son in her arms as he died in the dust of Marja, who had spent 6 months undercover at Cedar Creek Medical because the Pentagon had intercepted encrypted communications suggesting that Marcus Chen's current decline was no accident. Her locker on the 3rd floor, tucked in the corner of the staff break room, contained a pair of combat boots. They were worn smooth in places, scarred in others, their laces still tied with the precision of military habit. The leather had been salt-stained by sweat and blood and the dust of Helmand Province. They belonged to her son. They had belonged to Lance Corporal Daniel Cooper, who had served under Marcus Chen's command, who had died 17 months ago when an insurgent sniper round found the space between his body armor plates while he was running toward wounded Marines instead of away from them. Daniel had learned that instinct from his mother. He had learned to run toward danger from watching her train, from hearing her stories, from understanding at some cellular level that certain people were built to protect others and that retreat was never an acceptable option. The boot sat in her locker next to a photograph she permitted herself to look at exactly once per month. The photo showed Daniel in his dress blues, his face still unlined by deployment, his smile still convinced that his training would make him invincible. It had not. No amount of training made anyone invincible. What training did was create the capacity to transform grief into purpose. Ashley had taken that grief and poured it into her current assignment. She had taken the knowledge that Marcus Chen had tried to save her son and had done everything in her power to ensure that Marcus Chen would survive whatever was happening in room 347. Dr. Whitfield did not know who she was. He did not know that the quiet nurse with the steady hands and the precise documentation and the understanding of ASL was actually a master-level combat medic who had performed surgery in field hospitals under mortar fire. He did not know that his promise to have security escort her out before month's end was a statement he would not live long enough to execute. He did not know that someone was watching every move Jennifer Price made, documenting every instance of tampering with Marcus Chen's for line, building a case that would eventually become evidence in a federal investigation. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of the cardiac monitor, the whisper of the oxygen delivery system, the almost inaudible hum of hospital machinery that never slept. Ashley signed to Marcus Chen one more time, her hands moving through words he understood. "You're going to be fine, Master Sergeant. I promise you that." She was not lying. She had spent 6 months at Cedar Creek Medical building this cover, moving through the hospital corridors with the careful anonymity of someone who understood that visibility was a liability. She had watched and waited and documented everything she observed. She had built a narrative that would protect Marcus Chen, that would explain her competence in ways that could not raise suspicion. She had done everything she was trained to do. But what happened next would change everything. What happened next would begin the chain of events that would collapse her cover, that would bring investigators down on Cedar Creek Medical, that would ultimately bring the entire weight of the Pentagon crashing down on Dr. Whitfield's careful world of institutional power and professional arrogance. The cardiac monitor would alarm. The ticking clock would begin. And Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper would finally stop pretending to be just a nurse. The conference room at Cedar Creek Medical smelled like strong coffee and institutional furniture polish. 30 residents filled the tiered seating, their white coats pressed and their expressions arranged somewhere between focused and bored. Dr. Whitfield stood at the front with a patient chart held aloft like evidence at trial, his reading glasses positioned on the bridge of his nose with the precision of a surgeon placing an instrument. "This," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of pronouncement, "is what I call dangerously unorthodox documentation." Ashley stood against the back wall, her posture the kind that came from a decade of standing at attention. Her badge, still reading RN, Cedar Creek ICU, hung at her sternum. She watched Dr. Whitfield open the chart to a page filled with her handwriting, her notes on Marcus Chen's presentation from 3 days prior. "Patient reports chest pressure 3 out of 10, Whitfield read aloud, his tone dripping with theatrical concern, but facial micro-expressions suggest actual pain level approaching 7 out of 10. He looked up over his glasses, letting the silence settle. "Are we diagnosing by palm reading now? Perhaps consulting a crystal ball?" Scattered laughter moved through the residents like a wave. 2 of them exchanged glances. None of them looked at Ashley. "This is the kind of subjective interpretation," Whitfield continued, turning the page slowly, "that compromises clinical judgment and undermines the protocols this institution has spent 2 decades refining." He pressed the chart against his chest as if it pained him personally. "When a patient tells us their pain level, we document it. We don't inject our own psychological analysis into the medical record." Ashley's jaw tightened once. Not a visible flinch, barely perceptible, the kind of muscular adjustment most people would miss. Her hands remained at her sides, fingers uncurled. Her eye stayed forward, tracking nothing, reflecting nothing. The composure was perfect because it was practiced. She'd maintained this exact expression during briefings where someone else took credit for her work, during operations where her contributions went unrecorded, during 18 years of standing in spaces where her presence was acknowledged but her competence was questioned. "And here," Whitfield said, moving to another section of her notes, "we see the real issue. The patient's discharge orders, medically appropriate, clinically sound, supported by labs and imaging, have been questioned. Twice in 1 week. By a nurse." He emphasized the last word like a demotion. Not by a physician. Not by someone with her level of training and responsibility. The residents shifted. One of them glanced in her direction, then quickly away. "Master Sergeant Chen is stable," Whitfield stated, his voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering final judgment. "His cardiac function is within acceptable parameters. His respiratory status is appropriate for his age and history. The discharge plan is sound. Yet we see documentation here suggesting concern about subtle physical indicators." He closed the chart with deliberate slowness. "This is what happens when we prioritize enthusiasm over expertise." Ashley remained motionless. Her breathing stayed steady. Her face was a locked door, and she had spent years becoming very good at keeping doors locked. When Whitfield finished, he glanced in her direction and nodded, a gesture that might have been dismissal or acknowledgement. Ashley simply nodded once in return, the gesture economical and precise, then turned and left the conference room. She didn't walk quickly. She didn't walk defensively. She walked like someone clocking out from an appointment, moving through the hallway toward the ICU with the same measured pace she used on every other day. The third-floor break room held a vending machine that hummed with mechanical indifference. Ashley inserted $3 into the slot, pressed BE7, and collected an energy bar wrapped in silver foil. The fluorescent light above the machine cast everything in pale institutional white. It was 2:14 p.m. The signing nurse. The voice came from behind her, directed toward two board members in dark suits who stood near the break room entrance. Dr. Whitfield's tone was casual, collegial, the voice of a man speaking with peers. Exactly why we need to review our hiring process. Competence isn't about heart, it's about respecting the chain of command. Ashley inserted the energy bar into her pocket. Her fingers didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. Between you and me, Whitfield continued, his voice dropping slightly as if confiding something painful, security will escort her out before month's end. I'm documenting everything. Every protocol deviation, every questionable judgment call. He paused. Ashley could feel him watching her peripherally, ensuring she heard each word. This institution built itself on excellence. We can't compromise that for good intentions. She passed them all without a flicker. No acknowledgement, no eye contact, no indication that the words had landed anywhere other than passing through the air like common traffic. Her face could have been carved from stone. The board members watched her go, then looked back at Whitfield with expressions that suggested they were beginning to understand his position. Only when Ashley reached the staff bathroom, locked the door behind her, and pressed her back against the cool tile wall did her right hand shake. It was a small tremor, confined to her fingers, lasting perhaps 3 seconds. She pressed her palm flat against the tile until the shaking stopped, then turned on the sink and splashed her face with cold water. The mirror above the sink showed a woman with wet cheeks and steady eyes. She looked like she was supposed to look. She looked like a competent but unremarkable ICU nurse, the kind of person a hospital absorbed and forgot about within 6 months. She had been good at being invisible for most of her life. Good at standing in rooms where she didn't belong, collecting information, waiting for the moment when the pieces would align. 18 years of training had prepared her for humiliation. For being dismissed. For having her competence questioned by men who'd never heard a round come within 12 feet of their position. But 18 years hadn't prepared her for the possibility that she would fail Marcus Chen. The 2 a.m. shift had a different rhythm than daytime. The ICU contracted around the sleeping patients, the ventilators and monitors creating a percussion section of mechanical breath and digital heartbeats. Ashley moved through her rounds with the kind of efficiency that required no conscious thought, checking full lines and monitoring displays and charting vitals with the precision of someone who had performed these actions 10,000 times before. Marcus Chen slept in room 347, his hearing aids removed and sitting on his bedside table. The tracheostomy tube in his throat rose and fell with the ventilator's breath. His left shoulder bore a scar from shrapnel, and his right arm showed the tattoo of a unit insignia she recognized immediately, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company. The same unit her son had served with. The same unit that had reported her son killed in action with his commanding officer during a direct ambush in June 2011. She pulled Marcus Chen's lab work on the computer in the medication room, cross-referencing the values against the sequence she'd been tracking for 6 months. His phosphorus level sat in the file, documented and dated with meticulous precision. She photographed the screen with a pen that was not actually a pen, uploading the image to servers that did not technically exist, waiting for confirmation from a handler who had no official title and worked out of an office building that showed no signage. The confirmation arrived in 30 seconds, pattern confirmed. Phosphorus signature matches Chen incident, Valdez incident, Martinez incident. 3 other veteran patients over 18 months. Cedar Creek casualty rate for former Special Forces, 847% above national average. Someone was targeting them. Someone with access to the pharmacy, knowledge of cardiac pathology, and enough medical background to time the doses so death appeared natural. Marcus Chen was bait. Ashley was the hook. And the investigation was closing. She returned the pen to her pocket and continued her shift, moving between patients with the familiar rhythm of midnight rounds. When she reached Marcus Chen's room at 3:06 a.m., she checked his vitals and performed the routine assessment, her hands moving through the choreography of nursing with absolute muscle memory. His eyes opened as she adjusted the monitor leads. He watched her for a long moment, then reached for a pen and paper from his nightstand. His handwriting was large and precise. "You move like someone trained to move." "Who are you?" Ashley paused. For the first time in 48 hours, her face shifted slightly. She picked up a pen of her own and wrote, "Someone who knows Dark Horse Company." His eyes widened. He wrote, "My CO was Major James Patterson. Had a combat medic attached to his unit in Marja. Hands like yours. Moved like you move. Name was." She picked up the pen again and wrote in letters that were perfectly steady, "Different life now. Rest. I'm keeping you safe." She signed the same message with her hands, hands that had held 17 lives together in Marja, hands that had refused evacuation protocols, hands that had held her son's body in a field hospital 20 miles from the base. Her fingers moved through the signs with the kind of fluid precision that came from years of muscle memory, and as she signed the last word, "safe," his eyes filled with tears. He watched her leave, and in the hallway outside room 347, she saw Dr. Whitfield watching through the window. He was standing absolutely still, his expression arranged somewhere between calculation and confusion, the expression of a man beginning to understand that something did not add up. But he had no equation for what she was. The rest of the shift passed in routine. Vitals, assessments, charting, medication administration. By the time the morning sun broke through the hospital windows at 6:14 a.m., Ashley had completed 17 patient evaluations, documented 43 clinical assessments, and begun the countdown to a moment that would change everything. Dr. Whitfield's office door was open just far enough that his voice carried down the ICU corridor like a toxin diffusing through still air. Ashley moved between patient rooms with her tablet, her stylus precise against the screen as she documented vitals, her expression blank as his words reached her station. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, ozone, maybe, the electric charge of a man orchestrating his own victory before the pieces had even fallen into place. Johns Hopkins Credentialing Board. "Tell them I need a favor," Whitfield said into his phone, his tone the voice of someone accustomed to favors being granted. "A nurse under my supervision, Ashley Cooper, ICU staff. I need a full background verification. Look for inconsistencies in her references. The documentation she's been producing is dangerously outside protocol." Ashley's hand didn't pause. The flow rate she was recording remained steady, 150 milliliters per hour, sodium chloride, patient stable. But every word through that open door was calculating what he was building, a network, a narrative, the kind of institutional momentum that turned speculation into certainty. "I appreciate it," Whitfield continued. "Just between us, I've had concerns about her training background. Something feels constructed. Too polished, too consistent, you know that type. The diversity hire who looks perfect on paper until you pull the threads." The cursor on her tablet blinked. Room 347. Marcus Chen's chart. O2 sat 98%, blood pressure 124/78, heart rhythm normal. But the phosphorus levels from his morning labs, 17 micrograms per liter, climbing from yesterday's 15.2, told the real story. The poisoning was accelerating. Someone inside Cedar Creek Medical was introducing a slow toxin into a deaf Special Forces veterans for line, and in 11 hours, Chen would be discharged. Once he left this building, Ashley's window to prove it would collapse. The phone call ended. Whitfield made another. "Hospital board." "Yes, Dr. Whitfield." His voice had shifted, smoother now, the tone of a superior speaking to subordinates who understood the hierarchy. "The credentialing issue we discussed. I'm recommending immediate administrative review. The nurse in question performed advanced procedures without proper authorization. Multiple documentation irregularities. I'm placing her on immediate administrative leave pending investigation." A pause. No, I don't think she's a safety risk. I think she's a liability. Ashley finished documenting room 347 and moved to the nursing station. The fluorescent lights above hummed their mechanical drone, steady and indifferent. She pulled up her personnel file on the system, 3 years of employment history, a clean record, references that checked out because they were real, because the Navy had constructed them carefully before deploying her. But Whitfield wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for leverage. The next call came at 2:16 p.m. State Credentialing Board. I'm reporting a nurse under my supervision for potential scope of practice violations. Whitfield's voice had taken on the careful precision of someone speaking for a record. Ashley Cooper, RN, ICU staff at Cedar Creek Medical, Savannah. I'm requesting a formal investigation into her background verification and reference contacts. There are inconsistencies in her training documentation that concern me from a patient safety perspective. That was the anchor. That was the moment the institutional machinery began to turn. 2 investigators arrived at Cedar Creek at 4:15 p.m., their badges catching the afternoon light like warnings. They went directly to the credentialing office on the 2nd floor. Ashley watched from the ICU station as the credentialing director, Margaret, a woman in her 60s who had processed hundreds of nursing credentials, walked them through the employee file with the careful formality of someone aware she was being watched. Everything checks out, Margaret said, her voice carrying down the stairs. References verified, licensure clean, background clear. But? A pause. Ashley felt her hand steady itself against the counter. Something feels constructed. Too perfect, too consistent. Like someone designed this identity specifically to pass scrutiny. They were right. The identity was designed to pass scrutiny. Because it wasn't an identity at all. It was a deployment. By 5:06 p.m., Whitfield had called the State Nursing Board twice more. By 6:48 p.m., he had submitted a formal recommendation to the hospital's Medical Executive Committee requesting suspension of Ashley's clinical privileges. By 6:36 p.m., he was walking toward her at the nursing station, his face arranged in the expression of a man performing concern. "We need to talk," he said. "Not a question. Come with me." The hallway outside the ICU was quieter than the ward floor. Their footsteps echoed against tile in a rhythm like a countdown. Whitfield stopped at the credentialing office door, his hand on the frame in a gesture that suggested authority and civility in equal measure. "I've received concerning reports about your background verification," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, high enough that anyone listening would perceive professionalism. "The State Credentialing Board has initiated a formal investigation. Hospital administration has recommended immediate administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation." He handed her a printed notice, the words clinical and precise, credentialing irregularities, performance outside scope of practice, immediate suspension of clinical privileges, badge and access card to be surrendered by end of shift. Ashley read the document without moving her eyes. The paper was warm from the printer. His cologne was expensive, the kind that cost money men like him believed meant something about the cost of power. "Do you understand?" Whitfield asked. "I understand," Ashley said. Her voice was level. Her hands were still. This was what operational discipline looked like, the thing that separated soldiers from the people who broke under pressure. She had survived IED ambushes in Helmand Province by keeping her voice steady. She could survive this. "You're restricted from patient care effective immediately. No access to medical records, no contact with patients, no exceptions. The security office will process your badge by 7:06 p.m. Do not attempt to access Cedar Creek property after that time." "Yes, sir." She signed the acknowledgement form with a signature that was hers and not hers, steady, unremarkable, the signature of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to hide. The pen made no sound against the paper. The lights hummed. Somewhere in room 347, Master Sergeant Marcus Chen was sleeping, unaware that his surveillance network was disintegrating in real time. Whitfield turned and walked back toward his office. Ashley remained at the credentialing door, the notice in her hands, the calculation running through her mind like a computer processing a problem with no solution. 12 hours. That was the window before Marcus Chen's discharge. 12 hours to prove what she had confirmed but not yet documented. 12 hours before the poisoning team made their move. She walked back to the ICU. The station was busy now, 3 nurses charting, 1 on the phone with pharmacy, the unit secretary managing incoming pages. Nobody looked at her. Or rather, they looked carefully at everything else. At 6:52 p.m., she accessed Marcus Chen's chart one final time, her hands moving with the muscle memory of someone who had performed this motion 10,000 times before. Phosphorus levels. Hemoglobin count. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, all the electrolytes that would help an invisible poison remain invisible. She pulled his EKG strips from the last 72 hours. The pattern was there if you knew how to see it. The subtle flattening of the T waves. The slight prolongation of the QT interval. The signature of someone being slowly stopped by an element that should never have been flowing through his veins. She documented everything in a file labeled Chen, clinical observations, and encrypted it with a 128-bit key that was written on a scrap of paper now folded 3 times and hidden inside the lining of her locker. The same locker where her combat boots sat, worn and cracked and more honest than anything else in this building. At 7:41 p.m., she walked to the security office and surrendered her badge. The guard, a man named Torres, a Marine veteran who had survived 2 tours in Al-Anbar province, scanned it into the system with the mechanical precision of ritual. The badge deactivated. The door to Cedar Creek Medical became a threshold Ashley could no longer cross. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 6 minutes after that, her hands on the steering wheel, her breath measured and controlled. The poisoning documentation was in her locker. The evidence was in her encrypted file. Everything that mattered was still inside the hospital. And she was now outside, watching the building through her windshield, unable to move without triggering security protocols that would place her directly in the center of an investigation designed to bury her. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that somewhere in this city, someone was working a 12-hour shift, moving through Cedar Creek Medical with the kind of invisibility that came from knowing how hospitals really worked. Someone whose job it was to ensure that Master Sergeant Marcus Chen never left the building alive. And now, for the first time in 6 months, Ashley Cooper had no way to stop them. She started the car. The engine turned over with a sound like a breath being held and released. Through the parking garage's open section, she could see the lights of Cedar Creek Medical burning against the evening sky, steady and indifferent, like a beacon showing her exactly how far she had already fallen. The morning rounds came and went like every morning, vitals logged, charts reviewed, the rhythmic percussion of a hospital in motion. Ashley moved through Marcus Chen's room with the same careful efficiency she had maintained for 6 months, checking the 4-line, noting his oxygen saturation at 94%, reading the heart monitor's steady climb from baseline. He watched her work with eyes that saw what others had missed, a woman moving through the hospital like she owned every protocol in it, shoulders squared, hands steady as surgical lasers. The administrative restrictions meant nothing in this room. She was still his nurse. That mattered more than any badge. It was 11:56 a.m. when his heart rate spiked to 140. Ashley saw it first on the monitor, the rhythm climbing like a fever with no source. Marcus Chen's hand shot up from the blanket, not a gesture, a signal. His lips were already losing color, that particular shade of blue-gray that meant fluid, not air starvation. He signed frantically, his hands jerking, "Can't breathe." His mouth moved without sound. No voice to call for help, only the sudden terror of a man whose body was failing him in absolute silence. She recognized it in the same instant his chest spasmed. Cardiac tamponade. Fluid compressing his heart like a fist closing around prey, stealing every millimeter of space the organ needed to beat. Minutes to death. Possibly less. Ashley hit the code button with the edge of her palm and didn't wait for the team. The crash cart was 10 feet away. She moved like water finding its own path, retrieving the pericardiocentesis needle, 14-gauge angiocath, the plastic hub already gripped in her left hand, along with the sterile field setup. Muscle memory. Field hospitals in Helmand Province. Dust coating everything, mortars shaking the medical tent walls, a Marine with a sucking chest wound and fluid crushing his heart the same way. She had done this 43 times in combat conditions. This was a sterile room. The xiphoid process. Below it. 45-degree angle. Advance steady. Feel for the membrane give. Ashley's hands moved on their own, inserting the needle beneath the cartilage landmark where his ribs converged, angling upward toward his left shoulder at the precise angle that wouldn't perforate lung tissue. The syringe attached to the needle hub. One smooth motion. She withdrew the plunger. Blood. Dark and thick, 60 ccs pooling in the syringe as the pressure released from around his heart. Breathe, she said quietly, though he couldn't hear her. She said it for herself. The rhythm on the monitor wavered, sinus rhythm reasserting itself like someone waking from a deep dive, gasping, finding air again. His lips pinkened in real time. O2 sat climbing, 78, 82, 87, 90. Stable. The code team arrived 40 seconds later to find the emergency already managed, the needle secured with tape, the syringe set on the sterile field, Marcus Chen's rhythm steady as a metronome and his color returning like a photograph developing in chemical baths. Dr. Whitfield's phone call came before the team even finished their assessment. Ashley heard about it at 12:34 p.m. when security appeared at the nurse's station with the kind of formal courtesy that meant something had already been decided. Their hands rested on their belts near their badge clips. One of them, a young man with a military tattoo on his forearm, avoided her eyes as he delivered the message. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. You need to surrender your badge and exit through the main lobby. The other nurses looked away. The residents who had stood silent during Grand Round stared at their computers. No one spoke. The silence in a hospital is never really silence, it's the sound of ventilators breathing for people who can't, monitor alarms, the fluorescent lights overhead humming their electric lament. But this silence was different. It was the sound of 40 people pretending she didn't exist. Dr. Whitfield waited on the administrative balcony overlooking the lobby, arms crossed, his expression the color of satisfaction. He had the look of a man watching a problem solve itself. His phone was already back in his pocket. The network had been mobilized during that single call. Johns Hopkins. The State Board. Investigators who would find the inconsistencies in her carefully constructed background and press until everything fractured. He had moved faster than she calculated. That was the mistake, she had expected another week. She surrendered her badge at the front desk. The plastic laminate felt heavier in her hand than it should have, a weight that had nothing to do with physics. The woman behind the counter was new, hired 6 weeks ago, and took the badge without comment. Behind her, through the glass doors of the lobby, the afternoon light was already starting to thin, trees outside casting long shadows like accusers pointing at the floor. The parking garage was empty at this hour. Most of the day shift was still upstairs, and the night shift hadn't arrived. Ashley's car was where she had left it that morning, a practical sedan, unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that disappears into traffic. She got in and closed the door and turned off the ignition before she had even buckled the seatbelt. The silence inside the car was absolute. Her phone had 3 missed calls from a number that changed protocols every 30 days. Her handler. Mission compromised, asset exposed, 6 months of operational discipline burned to ash in the time it took Marcus Chen's heart to fail and her hands to save it. She didn't listen to the voicemails. She already knew what the extraction timeline would be. Already knew they would want her out of Savannah within 48 hours. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the image that wouldn't leave her mind, Marcus Chen alone in that room now, unprotected, with nurses who didn't know what to watch for, doctors who saw a routine case, a hospital that had already proven it contained the people who wanted him dead. She had been his insurance policy. Now she was gone, and he was exposed. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. The plastic was cold. Hard. Real in a way nothing else was. 20 years of military service had taught her how to compartmentalize the grief, the fear, the rage, into separate drawers that could be locked and labeled and shelved until they didn't ache anymore. But 6 months in Cedar Creek Medical had erased some of that distance. 6 months of watching a man her son had served with, had died serving with, deteriorate under a poison she could taste in his bloodwork but couldn't stop. Her hand started to shake. Not the shaking of fear. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint, the kind that comes from 23 years of training not to throw a fist through something, not to scream, not to let anyone see the crack in the foundation. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper did not break in parking garages. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper did not fail her mission. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper did not leave her people behind. But the woman sitting in the car, forehead on the steering wheel, hands shaking like someone in the cold, she was about to lose everything. A voice echoed in her memory, young and certain, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had never seen the worst yet. Take care of my guys, Mom. Promise me. Whatever happens out there, promise me you'll take care of them. Corporal Daniel Cooper. 22 years old. 3 tours in Marja. Dead at 23, radio operator to Master Sergeant Marcus Chen, and she had promised. She had promised. Now there were only the combat boots in her locker at Cedar Creek, worn leather that had walked through hostile territory, scuffed on edges where IED shrapnel had come close enough to mark the material. Daniel's boots. She hadn't let anyone clean them. Hadn't let anyone touch them. The boots had walked more missions than her son ever would. Ashley sat in that car for 20 minutes while the afternoon light moved across the parking garage concrete floor and the city of Savannah continued its indifferent rotation. The engine was dead. Her phone kept vibrating, her handler, her CO, probably someone from the Pentagon already assembling the extraction protocols and the cover story and the paperwork that would erase the last 6 months from every official record. But she didn't move. Couldn't move. The gap between Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper and this woman in the car was widening into something she couldn't cross back over, and on the other side, the side with her son's voice and her promise and her failure, there was nothing but the sound of a heart monitor that had stopped beating. The 6 o'clock news flickered across the lobby television like a confession nobody had asked for. The anchor's voice cut through the ambient hum of the waiting room, steady and official, breaking news from the Pentagon. Missing Navy Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, decorated combat medic who saved 17 lives during the siege of Marja, last seen on classified assignment 6 months ago. The photograph behind her head showed a younger woman in dress blues, dark hair pulled back, eyes that had seen things most people could not imagine surviving. The broadcast continued without hesitation, without mercy, the Navy is requesting immediate public assistance in locating Master Chief Cooper. She was on active operational status when she disappeared. Ashley's car sat in the Cedar Creek Medical Parking Garage, 3rd level, space 347. The engine was off. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, and she was not trembling because trembling was for people with choices left to make. The rain hammered the windshield like someone trying to get in. Her phone lay dark on the passenger seat beside her. In 2 hours, the medication would be administered. In 2 hours, Marcus Chen would walk out those hospital doors into the arms of the people who had been poisoning him for 6 months, and there was nothing left in her to stop it. The gap between Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper and the woman in the car had widened into something like a chasm. On one side, the voice of her son. On the other, silence. She did not hear the first sirens. She heard the second set. The elevator doors opened in the Cedar Creek Medical lobby and the crowd that had gathered around the television, visitors, staff, 2 orderlies who should have been in the cardiac wing, parted without being asked. The security guard, a Marine veteran named Rodriguez with a tattoo of the eagle, globe, and anchor visible on his left forearm, was first to move. He stood. His spine straightened like someone had just placed a hand on his shoulder and reminded him who he was. When he saw the photograph on the screen, his jaw set. When the anchor spoke the rank, his hand moved to his chest. He was 48 years old. He had been discharged 14 years ago. But muscle memory was muscle memory, and a Master Chief Petty Officer was not someone you forgot. Rodriguez's voice carried across the lobby the way voices do when they are born from authority rather than volume. A Master Chief on deck. The words were quiet. The silence that followed was absolute. Visitors turned. A nurse paused mid-stride with a chart in her hands. The fluorescent lights overhead continued their tired buzz, indifferent to the moment cascading beneath them. Rodriguez's eyes were still on the television. He said the words again, louder this time, and his hand remained over his heart. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper. On deck. The two-star general came through the front doors 90 seconds later, and the rain stopped. Or it continued. The script did not change, but everything else did. She wore service dress blues with 4 rows of ribbons. Her rank insignia caught the lobby lighting like a question that had finally found its answer. Behind her walked a Navy intelligence officer, a Pentagon aide, and someone from NCIS whose presence alone seemed to compress the air. The general moved toward the television like a woman who had come to correct the record, and her voice when she spoke had the texture of burnished steel, the sound of someone who had signed orders that changed wars. She was Brigadier General Claire Mercer, and she had come for her subordinate. Master Chief Cooper's service record, the general announced, holding the folder open like a book of testament. The voices in the lobby had stopped. Even the machines had gone quiet. Combat medic. 12 years active duty. 2 overseas tours in support of JSOC operations. She paused. The silence was so complete you could hear the rain outside finding its way into the building's corners. Bronze Star for Valor Under Fire, Helm and Province, 2014. Rodriguez's hand was still over his heart. Silver Star for Actions Under Hostile Fire while treating wounded personnel despite being wounded herself, Marja Sector, 2016. The general's voice did not rise. It did not need to. 2 Purple Hearts. And a Navy Cross. She said the last 3 words separately, each one its own sentence. The Navy Cross. The 3rd highest military decoration. Awarded for extraordinary heroism. She stopped speaking and let those words inhabit the space they had earned. Dr. Whitfield had been standing near the pharmacy station. His face had begun to change color approximately 40 seconds ago, starting at the jawline, spreading upward like a stain. His mouth had opened. It remained open. His hands, which had held authority like other men held breath, hung at his sides with nothing left to command. The nurse who wheeled Marcus Chen into the lobby was named Patricia Hale, and she understood American Sign Language fluently. She knew the grammar of hands. She knew the syntax of fingers articulating in space the truths that voices could not carry. Marcus Chen was no longer in a hospital gown. He wore black slacks and a gray button-down shirt someone had brought for him. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, with the precision of someone who had spent his career communicating in an environment where sound did not carry and signals had to be absolute. He signed, Marja. Ambush. Supply run. Mortar fire. His hands moved through the story like they were painting it across the air for everyone in the lobby to witness. She ran back. Under fire. I was down. Blood, his hands formed the shape of blood falling, pooling. She pulled me out. Took shrapnel. Meant for me. Meant for my chest. His hands went still for a moment. When they moved again, they were slower. She stayed. Did not evacuate. Stabilized all wounded. 17 soldiers. 1 nurse. No anesthesia, no blood, no equipment. He paused. His hands dropped. She did not leave. Not until everyone else could leave. The lobby was holding its breath. The general was watching. Rodriguez was watching. Every person in that space understood that they were in the presence of something that transcended rank and protocol and the normal architecture of consequence. This was a man speaking about the woman who had saved his life at the cost of something that could never be recovered. Marcus Chen's hands moved again, and this time they were spelling something specific. A name. Her son. Daniel. Same unit. Fallujah. His hands made the shape of a rifle. Killed. 2008. His hands went to his face then, and he was not crying because soldiers don't cry in public any more than nurses do, but his shoulders carried the weight of something that had finally been given permission to rest. The combat boots appeared on the lobby's auxiliary screen, a photograph the general held up, and Patricia Hale understood before anyone else what she was being shown. They were military issue, scuffed leather worn at the heel from 1,000 routes through desert terrain. They had been stored at the bottom of a locker in the Cedar Creek medical staff room for 6 months. The brass had been polished. The laces had been replaced. But they still carried the impression of the feet that had worn them daily, and that was Daniel Cooper's weight, Daniel Cooper's stride, Daniel Cooper's ghost made literal and handed down like a flag to a sister who had been carrying it alone. General Mercer turned toward Dr. Whitfield, and her face had the expression of someone whose patience had never been in question but whose mercy had now officially concluded. "Dr. Marcus Whitfield," she said. Not a question. Not an invitation. A statement of acknowledgement that preceded judgment. Your interference with an active military intelligence operation constitutes federal obstruction. Your medical license is under formal federal review pending criminal referral. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately, and your termination will be executed in front of staff and media present. Hospital administration, coordinate with security. The news cameras were in the lobby by then. They had arrived without anyone asking them to come. They had been waiting outside because someone at the Pentagon had made a single phone call to a single journalist, and that journalist had made calls of their own, and the story had propagated like light through a crack. Dr. Whitfield walked out of Cedar Creek Medical 6 minutes later with his hands at his sides and his face the color of something that had been left in the sun too long. Security walked him to his car. Cameras captured his hand shaking when he tried to unlock the door. Nobody saw where he went after that. Everyone had already moved forward. Ashley did not watch the news coverage from the garage. She did not watch it at all. What she did instead was climb the stairs back to the 3rd floor, back to the ICU, back to the room where Marcus Chen had been returned after his moment of testimony in the lobby below. She stood in the doorway without speaking. He turned from the window where he had been watching the rain, and his hands moved in greeting. She signed back, her fingers moving through the vocabulary she had learned in secret, and there was no apology in it, no explanation. Just the plain statement of what remained: your discharge is approved. Medical clearance. Full recovery. His hands responded, because of you. Her hands went still for a moment, then formed the signs for, because of both of us. The federal courthouse 6 months later held the ceremony nobody had asked for but everyone had been waiting for. The 2 pharmacy technicians who had spent 6 months systematically poisoning Special Forces veterans, targeting soldiers they believed the system should have already discarded, received 20-year sentences each. The evidence Ashley had documented, phosphorus levels, timeline analysis, the pattern of symptoms that nobody else had been trained to see, formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. The judge commended Master Chief Petty Officer Cooper's service, the Pentagon released a statement about the excellence of her work, and Cedar Creek Medical announced a new partnership with the VA to ensure that military-connected patients received specialized care. Ashley wore her dress blues. Marcus Chen wore his, walking without assistance, the wound in his chest healed but not forgotten. She placed her son's boots at the memorial, the ones that had waited in her locker for 6 months like they were holding the space where Daniel used to stand. The inscription read, "They gave everything so others could live." Marcus Chen's hands moved through the air, signing the words engraved below, "The ones who have seen the worst often give the most." She turned to him and signed it back, and neither of them looked away from what they had built from the wreckage of 6 months of hiding and holding on and choosing to save one life at a time. Someone had reported seeing Dr. Whitfield teaching CPR certification at a community college in Valdosta. Minimum wage. Teaching teenagers chest compressions instead of commanding hospital policy. Ashley never looked back. If you've made it this far, you know the truth: the quietest warriors walk among us. Subscribe for more stories of hidden valor. Like this video. And comment below, What would you have done in Ashley's position? Would you have saved him, or would you have walked away?